completely worthless to this organization." Those words cut through the conference room like a blade, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. I sat motionless at the far end of the polished mahogany table, my hands perfectly still despite the earthquake happening inside me. 26 pairs of eyes darted between Richard Harmon's smug face and my carefully neutral expression. Not a single person spoke up. Not one. The quarterly review meeting at Vantage Technologies had been going for nearly 2 hours when Richard, our chief operations officer, decided to make an example of me. What began as a critique of my department's marketing proposal had devolved into something much more personal, a public flogging dressed up as constructive feedback. "Rebecca," he continued, leaning forward with that predatory smile I'd come to recognize all too well, "I'm not sure what we're paying you for these days. Your campaigns lack vision, your team misses deadlines, and frankly, your contributions to executive discussions are, well, let's just say forgettable." I inhaled slowly through my nose, exhaled through slightly parted lips. A technique I'd perfected over the 15 months I'd worked under Richard's tyrannical leadership. My gaze remained level, my voice steady when I finally responded. "I appreciate your feedback, Richard. I'll take it under advisement." That's all I said. 6 words, delivered without emotion. I didn't defend the countless nights I'd stayed past midnight refining proposals he'd later claim as his own. I didn't mention how my team had the highest retention rate despite the lowest budget. I didn't point out that the Jenkins account, our biggest client acquisition this year, had signed specifically because of my presentation. Instead, I gathered my notepads and tablet as Richard dismissed the meeting with his usual self-important flourish. I walked out with my shoulders back, spine straight, heels clicking a steady rhythm against the marble floors. Only once the elevator doors closed did I allow my mask to slip, just for a moment. My reflection in the polished steel showed a woman I sometimes barely recognized. Designer suit in muted gray, hair pulled into a sleek bun, minimal jewelry, absolutely nothing that could be labeled as distracting or unprofessional. This version of Rebecca Taylor was calculated, constructed, specifically for survival at Vantage. She was competent but not threatening, present but not demanding, palatable to men like Richard who saw ambition in women as a character flaw rather than an asset. Back at my desk, I opened my computer and navigated to a password-protected folder, labeled Budget Projections 2023 Q4. Anyone glancing over my shoulder would see spreadsheets and financial models. What they wouldn't see was what I'd privately named the Harmon file, a meticulous record of every instance Richard had undermined me, claimed my work, excluded me from critical meetings, or made inappropriate comments over the past 15 months, dates, times, witnesses, verbatim quotes, all documented with the precision of someone who knew this information would eventually matter. Today's worthless comment would become entry number 73. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Emily from HR. You okay? That was brutal." I typed back. "Nothing I haven't heard before." Emily. "He's a monster. Someone should report him." I didn't respond to that. Emily was new. She still believed the system worked, that HR protected employees rather than the company. I knew better. As the office emptied for lunch, I stayed behind. Not because I was too shaken to join my colleagues at the usual cafe down the street, but because I had a call scheduled, one I couldn't take anywhere someone might overhear. At precisely 12:30, my phone rang. "Ms. Taylor, I have Mr. Abernathy for you." "Put him through," I replied, my voice shifting into something stronger, more assured than anything my coworkers would recognize. "Rebecca," James Abernathy's warm voice filled the line. "How are things? Progressing on your end?" "Right on schedule," I answered, a small smile playing at my lips for the first time that day. "The due diligence is complete. Transfer of ownership documents are ready for final signature." "And your research project?" I glanced at my screen, at entry 73 still waiting to be categorized and time-stamped. More comprehensive than you could imagine. Any second thoughts? He asked, though we both knew the answer. Not a single one. Good. The board meets on Friday to formalize everything. You'll have full control by Monday morning. Perfect. I savored the word like fine wine. And nobody suspects anything? James chuckled. My dear, that was your only request when we started this process 3 months ago. Complete confidentiality has been maintained. As far as Richard Harmon or anyone else at Vantage Technologies knows, the company is simply being acquired by Abernathy Holdings. The fact that you're the one who orchestrated this acquisition, well, that remains our little secret until you decide otherwise. After we hung up, I closed my eyes briefly, allowing myself just a moment to feel the weight of what was coming. I hadn't planned this, not initially. When I joined Vantage after completing my MBA, I had genuine aspirations of climbing the corporate ladder through hard work and innovation. I believed in meritocracy, in fairness, in professional environments where skill and dedication mattered, more than gender or connections. Richard Harmon had systematically dismantled those beliefs, one humiliation at a time. But what Richard never bothered to discover was that before my MBA, before my carefully constructed corporate persona, I had built and sold 2 successful marketing firms, the modest lifestyle I maintained, the apartment in the unfashionable part of town, the sensible car. These were choices, not necessities. My net worth was substantial enough that when James Abernathy, an old friend and mentor, mentioned Vantage, was quietly being positioned for sale, I could do more than just listen. I could act. 3 days after being called worthless in front of my entire department, I would become Richard Harmon's boss. Not that he knew it yet. I reopened my documentation file and carefully recorded today's events. This wasn't about revenge. This was about transformation, about building something better from the ashes of what deserved to burn. The next morning, the office was buzzing with whispers. News of an acquisition had leaked overnight, probably from someone on the legal team, who'd noticed the unusual activity. By the time I stepped off the elevator, clutching my usual plain coffee tumbler, theories were already multiplying like bacteria in a petri dish. I heard it's a tech giant from the West Coast, said Melanie from accounts, her voice dropping as I passed by. Complete restructuring, half of us gone by Christmas. No way, countered Derek, her cubicle neighbor. My cousin works for Abernathy Holdings. They're notorious for buying companies just to strip them for parts and intellectual property. I kept my expression neutral as I unlocked my office door. Let them speculate. The truth was far more interesting than any of their theories. My phone pinged with meeting requests before I could even set down my bag. Richard was calling an emergency executive session at 10 a.m. No agenda provided. Typical. He operated on the belief that keeping others in the dark maintained his power. I confirmed my attendance with a single click. At 9:55, I made my way to the conference room, the same one where Richard had humiliated me just yesterday. I chose a seat halfway down the table, not hiding in the back, but not presuming importance at the front either. Just Rebecca being Rebecca, predictable and unthreatening. Richard burst in at 10:03, his typical power move of making everyone wait just long enough to establish dominance. His face was flushed, tie slightly askew, unusual details for a man who typically maintained impeccable composure. Let's cut to the chase, he announced without preamble. Yes, Vantage is being acquired. Yes, the deal is nearly complete. And no, I don't know all the details yet, but I'm meeting with the new ownership team on Friday. He scanned the room, his gaze skipping over me as if I were part of the furniture. This is a critical moment for all of us. How we present ourselves. Our departments, our value to the new owners will determine who stays and who goes. Marjorie from legal raised her hand. Do we know anything about the new owner's plans? Restructuring? Relocating? Richard's jaw tightened. Abernathy Holdings has been frustratingly tight-lipped, but I have connections. He straightened his tie, regaining some confidence. Which is why I've arranged a special pre-meeting with James, Abernathy himself, just him and me, establishing a rapport before the formal board introduction. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. James had mentioned nothing about this special meeting during our call yesterday. Richard was either lying or had bullied some assistant into granting him time on James's calendar. In preparation, Richard continued, I want comprehensive department evaluations by end of day. Strengths, weaknesses, staff assessments. Be brutal in your analysis. The last thing we need is dead weight dragging us down during this transition. His eyes finally landed on me, lingering just long enough to convey his meaning. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. Rebecca, he said with false sweetness, since your department has been struggling lately, perhaps you should focus on identifying which team members are truly essential versus replaceable. Translation: prepare to sacrifice your people to save yourself. I'll provide an honest assessment of my department's contributions, I replied evenly, all of which have been substantial, despite limited resources. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face at my subtle pushback. Just have it on my desk by 4. And make it realistic, not another exercise in creative writing. Several colleagues winced at the barb. Yesterday's public dressing down was still fresh in everyone's mind. After the meeting dispersed, I returned to my office and closed the door. Instead of starting the pointless report Richard had demanded, I opened my email and composed a message to James Abernathy. He responded within minutes, confirming what I'd suspected. Richard had indeed strong-armed his way onto James's calendar for tomorrow morning. Should I cancel? James asked. Absolutely not, I replied. I'd love to hear his unfiltered pitch. Just don't mention our connection. The rest of the day passed in a blur of nervous colleagues stopping by my office, seeking reassurance I couldn't honestly provide, at least not yet. I deflected questions, offered vague comfort, and pretended to work on Richard's report while actually finalizing details for Monday's transition with James's legal team. At 3:55 p.m., I printed out a single page and walked it to Richard's office. His assistant Jennifer gave me a sympathetic look as I knocked on his door. Come in, he barked, not looking up from his computer. I placed the paper on his desk without comment and turned to leave. What's this? He demanded, finally glancing at what I'd given him. My department evaluation, as requested. He snatched it up, eyes narrowing as he scanned the contents. It was a simple statement. Every member of the marketing team has demonstrated exceptional value, creativity, and dedication. I stand behind each of them and their contributions to Vantage Technologies. Detailed performance metrics attached. The failure attached was a deliberate misnomer. There was nothing attached. Richard's face darkened. This is unacceptable. I asked for a comprehensive analysis, not a kindergarten participation trophy for your entire department. I remained by the door, one hand on the handle. My team's performance metrics speak for themselves. If you need the raw data, it's all available in the quarterly reports I've submitted consistently for the past 15 months. Reports that clearly demonstrate your department's declining performance, he snapped. Reports that show we've increased client retention by 23% while operating with a budget that's been cut 3 quarters in a row, I countered, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. Creative solutions in resource-constrained environments are exactly what new ownership typically values during transitions. Wouldn't you agree? For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Richard's face. Then his expression hardened. Get out of my office and have a real evaluation on my desk first thing tomorrow, or clear out your desk instead. I nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind me. Jennifer looked up with wide eyes. She'd heard everything. He can't fire you over this, she whispered. I gave her a gentle smile. Don't worry about me, Jennifer. Things have a way of working themselves out. Walking back to my office, I felt lighter than I had in months. Richard's threat lingered in the air like a storm cloud, but for the first time since joining Vantage, I wasn't afraid of the lightning. In fact, I was rather looking forward to the thunder. Thursday morning arrived with a peculiar energy pulsing through the office. Employees huddled in break rooms and hallways, conversations dropping to hushed tones whenever management walked by. Everyone was bracing for change, imagining worst-case scenarios while hoping for the best. I observed it all with quiet interest. This ecosystem of anxiety that Richard had cultivated over years of capricious leadership. My desk phone rang at precisely 9:15 a.m. Rebecca Taylor? I answered, already knowing who would be on the line. Rebecca, darling. James Abernathy's voice boomed through the speaker, loud enough that anyone passing by my open office door would hear. Perfect. Just calling to confirm our dinner tonight. Maestro's at 7? I smiled, both at James's impeccable timing and his flair for theatrics. This call was entirely for show, establishing a connection that would seem coincidental tomorrow when everything changed. Looking forward to it, Mr. Abernathy. It's been too long. James, please. We've known each other far too many years for such formality. A shadow darkened my doorway. Richard stood there, one hand clutching a leather portfolio so tightly his knuckles had gone white. His expression cycled rapidly from confusion to suspicion. Must run now, I continued smoothly. See you at 7. As I hung up, Richard stepped into my office without waiting for an invitation. You know James Abernathy? His voice carried an accusatory edge. I looked up with practiced innocence. We've crossed paths at industry events over the years. He's been a mentor of sorts. A mentor, Richard repeated, testing the word like he didn't quite believe it. And you didn't think to mention this connection when we discussed the acquisition yesterday? I tilted my head slightly. You didn't ask about my professional network, Richard. And honestly, would you have cared if I had volunteered the information? His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. Richard hated being outmaneuvered even more than he hated being challenged directly. I could practically see the calculations running behind his eyes, reassessing my position in his mental hierarchy. I need you to set up a meeting for me with Abernathy, he finally said, before my scheduled time tomorrow. I'm afraid I can't do that, I replied, my tone apologetic but firm. James has a very specific schedule he adheres to. His assistant handles all his appointments. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then put in a good word. Tell him I'm looking forward to discussing the future direction of Vantage. The future direction. As if he would have any say in it after tomorrow. I'll certainly mention that you're eager to meet him, I offered, knowing full well James was already anticipating Richard's self-aggrandizing pitch with some amusement. Richard lingered, clearly wanting to extract more information about my connection to James, but too proud to ask directly. Finally, he dropped a thick folder on my desk. The executive team is having dinner with the board tonight at Le Cirque. I expect you to be there. I glanced pointedly at my desk phone. I already have plans this evening. Cancel them, he ordered. This dinner is mandatory for all department heads. I'm afraid that's not possible, I said, offering no further explanation. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let me be very clear, Rebecca. Your position at this company is hanging by a thread. The only reason you haven't been replaced is because I haven't had time to interview candidates. Now, with this acquisition, there will be cuts. Deep cuts. Your little friendship with Abernathy might get you a courtesy meeting, but it won't save your job if I recommend termination. His threat hung in the air between us, a familiar tactic that had worked countless times before with other employees. I met his gaze steadily. I understand completely, Richard. I'll bear that in mind. I gestured to the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a department to run. For a moment, I thought he might explode. His face flushed dark red, eyes bulging slightly. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, nearly colliding with Emily from HR, who had been hovering nervously in the hallway. Emily slipped into my office, closing the door behind her. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "Stand up to him like that?" I smiled. "Practice. And perspective." "Well, you might be the only one not terrified right now," she said, sinking into the chair opposite my desk. "Rumor has it they're bringing in efficiency consultants next week. Everyone's updating their resumes. Perhaps that's premature," I suggested gently. Emily shook her head. "Rebecca, you know how these things go. New ownership means new vision, new team. People like Richard always land on their feet, but the rest of us—" Her voice trailed off. "Have a little faith," I said, unable to resist offering some comfort. "Change isn't always bad." She eyed me curiously. "You seem awfully calm for someone Richard just threatened directly." I shrugged. "Let's just say I've learned to take a longer view of workplace dynamics." After Emily left, I closed my office door, something I rarely did, and called James again, this time on my personal cell. "Richard's getting nervous," I told him without preamble. "He's demanding attendance at a strategic dinner tonight." James chuckled. "And will you attend this command performance?" "Absolutely not. But I suspect the dinner conversation will center largely around damage control and how to position himself favorably with you." "Fascinating," James mused. "And our dinner is still on?" "Wouldn't miss it. We have final details to discuss before tomorrow's announcement." I ended the call and turned to my window, gazing out at the city sprawled below. 15 floors up, people looked tiny, their problems reduced to miniature scale. Perspective indeed. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe, my assistant. "Richard called an emergency marketing team meeting in 10 minutes. Conference room B." I sighed, gathering my notebook and tablet. This would be Richard's attempt to rally my team against me, to position himself as their savior in the coming transition. A classic divide-and-conquer strategy. I'd seen him do it in other departments when managers fell out of favor. Little did he know, he was fighting a battle that was already lost. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Conference room B buzzed with nervous energy when I arrived. My team of 8 sat clustered at one end of the table, exchanging worried glances. Richard stood at the front of the room, projector remote in hand, looking irritatingly pleased with himself. The screen behind him displayed a marketing organization chart, one I'd never seen before. I slipped into an empty chair beside Zoe, who leaned over to whisper, "He's been here for 5 minutes already. Wouldn't start until you arrived." I nodded, bracing myself for whatever theatrical performance Richard had planned. "Ah, Rebecca, so glad you could join us," he said with false warmth. "I was just about to share some exciting opportunities with your team." My team. Interesting choice of words, considering what was displayed on his slide. "As you all know," Richard continued, clicking to the next slide, "Vantage is entering a period of transition. Times like these separate the essential from the expendable." My team shifted uncomfortably. Dev, our brilliant data analyst, adjusted his glasses, a nervous tick I'd noticed whenever he felt threatened. Amara, our creative director, crossed her arms tightly across her chest. "I've taken the liberty of reimagining the marketing department structure to better position you all for success under new ownership," Richard announced, gesturing grandly to his slide. "Effective immediately, marketing will be divided into 2 sub-departments: strategic communications, which will report directly to me, and support services, which will continue under Rebecca's supervision." The room went silent as everyone processed what this meant. Richard had effectively stripped away all high-visibility projects and strategic initiatives, leaving me with email newsletters and trade show logistics. "These changes," Richard continued smugly, "have already been approved by current leadership and will be presented to Abernathy Holdings as our recommended structure moving forward. I raised my hand, the perfect picture of professional composure. Approved by which leadership, Richard? This is the first I'm hearing of any reorganization. His smile didn't falter. Executive leadership, Rebecca. The decision was made at a level above your current clearance. No offense. None taken, I replied mildly. And I assume you have documentation of this approval? For the transition records? A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. The paperwork is being processed. But, given the urgency of the acquisition timeline, we're implementing now and documenting later. In other words, he was making a power play without proper authorization, hoping that by the time anyone noticed, it would be too late to reverse course. I see, I said, allowing a note of skepticism to enter my voice. And have you consulted legal about making organizational changes during an acquisition? There are usually strict protocols. Richard's smile tightened. Let me worry about legal, Rebecca. Your focus should be on reassuring your remaining team members that their jobs are secure. He emphasized remaining, letting the implied threat hang in the air. Dev glanced between us, clearly connecting dots. Mr. Harmon, are you saying some of us are being let go? Richard turned his practiced sympathetic expression toward Dev. Nothing has been finalized, but transitions like these typically require streamlining. Those of you with specialized skills will likely find homes in the new structure. Translation: those who pledged loyalty to Richard would be protected, the others would be sacrificed. Now, Richard continued briskly, let's discuss immediate action items. Amara, I'd like you to prepare a portfolio of our premium client work. Only the award-winning campaigns. Amara frowned. Most of those were Rebecca's concepts. Richard waved dismissively. Let's focus on results, not who had which idea. The point is to showcase Vantage's capabilities to the new owners. I watched my team's faces as Richard systematically commandeered their talents, positioning himself as their champion while undermining my authority. Some looked confused, others resigned. Zoe caught my eye, silently questioning whether to challenge what was happening. I gave an almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. For the next 40 minutes, Richard outlined his vision for the new marketing department. He assigned prestigious projects to himself, relegated routine maintenance to my support team, and made it abundantly clear who would be valued in his reimagined hierarchy. When he finally concluded, he fixed me with a pointed stare. I trust you'll facilitate this transition smoothly, Rebecca, for everyone's sake. I always prioritize what's best for the team, I replied evenly. As the meeting disbanded, my team lingered, clearly wanting reassurance I couldn't yet provide. Not in this room, not with Richard watching our every interaction, cataloging who remained loyal to me. We'll discuss departmental adjustments this afternoon, I told them, keeping my tone professional. For now, please continue with your current projects until you receive direct instructions from me. Richard frowned. Actually, I've emailed everyone their new assignments already. Implementation begins immediately. I stood my ground. As current head of marketing, I need time to review these changes and create a proper transition plan. My team will continue their existing work until I've had that opportunity. The air in the room crackled with tension. My team looked between us, witnessing a power struggle they didn't fully understand. Fine, Richard finally conceded, though his eyes promised retribution. You have until end of day. After that, the new structure takes effect, regardless of your transition plan. After Richard left, Amara approached me. What's really going on, Rebecca? This doesn't make sense. The Connect campaign is launching next week, and he wants to reassign everyone? I chose my words carefully, aware that anything I said would circulate. Times of transition create opportunities for various agendas. All I can say right now is that Richard doesn't have the final word on our department's future. But he seems so confident, Dev interjected, like he knows something we don't. I allowed myself a small smile. That feeling goes both ways. As my team filed out, still confused but marginally less panicked, I checked my watch. Less than 24 hours until the board meeting. Less than a day until Richard Harmon learned what worthless truly meant. Maestro's was exactly the kind of restaurant I'd avoided during my time at Vantage. Exclusive, expensive, the kind of place where Richard and his executive cronies conducted their very important business dinners that somehow always included bottles of wine worth more than what my junior staff made in a day. The maitre d' recognized James immediately, escorting us to a private alcove with a view of both the city, skyline and the main dining room. I took the liberty of ordering champagne, James said once we were seated. Tonight feels like a celebration. The waiter appeared with a bottle of Dom Pérignon, pouring 2 flutes with practiced precision before disappearing discreetly. 2 new beginnings. James raised his glass. And to watching Richard Harmon's face tomorrow when he realizes who actually holds his fate in their hands. I clinked my glass against his butt, didn't immediately drink. This isn't just about revenge. James, I need you to understand that. James studied me over the rim of his flute. At 67, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, he had the presence of someone who had seen it all and remained unimpressed. Then what is it about exactly? You've spent 15 months in a company beneath your talents, enduring treatment that would make most people quit after a week. I took a small sip of champagne, letting the bubbles dissolve on my tongue before answering. It's about transformation. Vantage has incredible potential that's been squandered under leadership that values appearances over substance. The company culture is toxic, but the talent is extraordinary. So you're telling me this elaborate charade, James gestured broadly, encompassing not just our dinner but the entire 15-month undercover operation, was about saving a mid-sized marketing firm from mediocre management? I smiled. Partly. But also about creating something better. A company where people like Amara and Dev can thrive without playing politics. Where innovation isn't stifled by ego. Where someone's worth isn't determined by whether they wear the right clothes or attended the right schools. James nodded slowly. Always the idealist. Even after all these years. Practical idealist, I corrected. The numbers support everything I'm proposing. Vantage's talent retention problems, declining market share, shrinking profit margins, they're all symptoms of Richard's leadership philosophy. Our first course arrived, seared scallops with a citrus reduction that probably cost more than the lunch budget for my entire team for a week. The irony wasn't lost on me. Speaking of our friend Richard, James said between bites. He was quite persistent in getting on my calendar today. Called my assistant 4 times with increasingly urgent reasons why we needed to meet before the board presentation. I laughed softly. Let me guess. He positioned himself as the only person who could guide Vantage through this transition successfully? Almost verbatim, James confirmed. He also mentioned a troublesome marketing manager who lacked vision and would need to be managed out during the restructuring. Did he actually use the phrase managed out? Indeed he did, along with several other corporate euphemisms for firing someone without admitting you're firing them. James dabbed his mouth with his napkin. I played along, of course, asked for specific examples of this troublesome manager's shortcomings. My eyebrow raised. And did he provide them? Oh, he was more than happy to elaborate. According to Richard, you lack executive presence, strategic thinking, and the ability to inspire your team. Also, your taste in office attire is apparently uninspired. I couldn't help but laugh. That last part might actually be true. I've been deliberately dressing down since I started at Vantage. James shook his head, amused. The lengths you've gone to for this experiment, adopting a completely different persona, suppressing your natural leadership style, even changing your wardrobe. Was it worth it? I considered the question as our entrees arrived. Ask me again after tomorrow. But I think yes. I've learned things about leadership, good and bad, that I never would have understood from the top looking down. We spent the next hour reviewing the final details for tomorrow's board meeting: timing, documentation, legal considerations. James, as acting representative of Abernathy Holdings, would introduce me as the actual purchaser of Vantage Technologies only after the board had formally approved the sale. "What will you do about Richard afterward?" James asked as we finished our dessert, a delicate chocolate soufflé that somehow managed to be both decadent and light as air. Immediate termination would be most satisfying, but perhaps not most strategic. I had considered this question extensively over the past months, weighing justice against practicality. "I'm not firing him tomorrow." James looked surprised. "After everything he's done? The undermining, the public humiliation, today's attempt to dismantle your department?" "Firing him immediately would be about vengeance," I explained. "And while that might feel good momentarily, it wouldn't serve the company or my long-term vision. Besides, I want him to experience the new Vantage, to see what's possible when leadership focuses on innovation instead of intimidation." "You're a better person than I am," James said with a small shake of his head. "I'd have him escorted out by security before lunch." I smiled. "I didn't say he was keeping his current position, just that I'm not firing him outright." As we waited for the check, I glanced around the restaurant, half expecting to see Richard and the executive team at their Le Cirque dinner. But of course, they wouldn't be here. This wasn't their territory. They would be across town, plotting strategies, forming alliances, completely unaware that by this time tomorrow, everything they thought they knew about power at Vantage would be upended. James signed the bill with a flourish. "Shall I have my driver take you home?" I shook my head. "I need to prepare a few things for tomorrow. I'll take a cab to the office and finish up there." "At this hour?" James checked his watch. It was nearly 10 p.m. "The big reveal is less than 12 hours away. Surely whatever it is could wait." "Just one last detail I want to perfect," I assured him. "I've waited 15 months for tomorrow. I want everything to be flawless." The truth was, I wanted to walk the empty halls of Vantage one last time as Rebecca the overlooked, Rebecca the underestimated. By this time tomorrow, that version of me would be gone forever, replaced by the woman I truly was, the woman I had temporarily set aside but never actually lost. The Vantage offices were eerily quiet when I arrived. The security guard barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle as I signed in, accustomed to my late hours. The elevator hummed softly as it carried me to the 15th floor, the doors opening to reveal darkened hallways illuminated only by emergency exit signs and the ambient glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. I didn't head directly to my office. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the entire floor, past cubicles and conference rooms where important decisions were made daily, some wise, many not. My footsteps echoed softly on the polished concrete floors as I moved through this space that had been both prison and laboratory for me these past 15 months. Richard's corner office stood imposing even in darkness, his nameplate gleaming under the security lights. I paused before the heavy oak door, then, on impulse, tried the handle. Unlocked. Richard's misplaced confidence extended even to office security protocols. I flipped on the small desk lamp, casting a pool of warm light across his meticulously organized workspace. Everything positioned to project power. The desk positioned to make visitors feel small. Awards displayed at eye level. A single-framed photo of Richard shaking hands with the governor. What wasn't visible were the human costs of his leadership style. The talented employees who left, broken by his deliberate cruelty. The innovations never pursued because they came from people he deemed unworthy. The toxic culture that rewarded sycophants and punished genuine creativity. I opened his desk drawer, not snooping but confirming what I already suspected. There it was, a leather-bound portfolio containing his personal business development strategy. I'd heard rumors about this document from Jennifer, who'd once glimpsed it when organizing his files. Richard's playbook for climbing the corporate ladder, reportedly containing strategies for taking credit for others' work, undermining potential rivals, and cultivating executive sponsors. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. Tomorrow, it would become irrelevant. Closing the drawer, I switched off the lamp and left, continuing my solitary tour through the silent office. I passed the marketing department, my department, where empty desks stood as silent witnesses to countless late nights and weekend work sessions. Where Amara had cried in the supply closet after Richard dismissed her award-winning campaign, concept as pedestrian. Where Dev had contemplated quitting after being passed over for promotion in favor of Richard's golf buddy's nephew. Finally, I reached my own modest office. No corner views or oak doors here, just functional furniture, neutral decor, and walls covered with campaign timelines and project plans rather than accolades. I settled behind my desk and opened my laptop, the screen's glow illuminating the space. For the next hour, I meticulously finalized what I'd come here to complete: a comprehensive organizational restructuring plan for Vantage. Not Richard's hasty power grab disguised as efficiency, but a thoughtful realignment based on talent, collaboration, and innovation. I'd been working on it for months, consulting discreetly with industry experts, studying successful models at other agencies, and most importantly, identifying the hidden talent within Vantage's ranks. Under my plan, hierarchies would flatten. Contributions would be valued regardless of title. Transparency would replace secrecy. The document detailed everything from compensation restructuring to project assignment protocols, mentorship programs, to client relationship management. It wasn't a utopian fantasy. I'd run the numbers exhaustively. This approach would not only improve employee retention and satisfaction, but also boost productivity, client outcomes, and ultimately, profitability. The data supported what my instincts had always told me. Treating people with dignity wasn't just morally right, it was good business. As I put the finishing touches on the document, my phone pinged with a text from James. All systems go for tomorrow, board members briefed, paperwork ready, sleep well, future CEO. I smiled, saving the file and closing my laptop, CEO. The title didn't matter much to me, but the opportunity did. The chance to build something different, something better. Not just for myself, but for everyone at Vantage who deserved more than what Richard's leadership had offered them. Before leaving, I opened my desk drawer and removed a small velvet pouch I'd placed there weeks ago in anticipation of tomorrow. Inside was a simple platinum pendant, a design I'd commissioned from a local jeweler, a minimalist representation of two paths converging into one. It wasn't extravagant or showy, just meaningful to me as a symbol of bringing my two worlds together. I slipped it around my neck, tucking it beneath my blouse where it rested cool against my skin. A private reminder of what tomorrow would bring. The city was quieter now as I made my way home, streetlights casting pools of gold on empty sidewalks. In my apartment, I didn't immediately prepare for bed despite the late hour. Instead, I opened my closet and pushed aside the row of serviceable, unmemorable outfits I'd worn during my time at Vantage. Behind them hung a garment bag I hadn't unzipped in 15 months. I did so now, revealing a tailored charcoal suit with subtle pinstripes, elegant, confident, unapologetically powerful. My fingers traced the fine Italian wool, the custom lining, the perfect stitching. Tomorrow, Rebecca Taylor would finally dress like herself again. I laid out the suit for morning, along with a cream silk blouse and the black Louboutins I'd kept hidden at the back of my closet. Not because I was vain about designer labels, but because these particular shoes had been a gift to myself when I sold my second company. A reminder of what I'd accomplished through hard work and ingenuity. Sleep came easily that night, without the usual weight of having to calculate my every move, monitor my every word, diminish my every instinct. Tomorrow, masks would fall away. Truth would finally have its moment in the spotlight, and Richard Harmon would learn what it felt like to be the one underestimated, the one overlooked, the one deemed worthless. But more importantly, Vantage would begin its transformation into something worthy of its talented people. That was the real victory I sought. Not Richard's humiliation, but the company's elevation. His downfall was merely a necessary side effect of the greater good. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself surprisingly grateful for these 15 months of invisibility. They had taught me patience, given me perspective, and shown me exactly what needed to change. Sometimes, the best way to lead is first to understand what it feels like to be powerless. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through my apartment windows. For the first time in 15 months, I didn't hit snooze or drag myself reluctantly from bed. Today was the day everything changed. I moved with purpose, turning on classical music, another habit I'd abandoned at Vantage, where I pretended to prefer whatever generic pop was currently trending. The woman who stared back at me from the bathroom mirror looked different already. More present, more alive. I styled my hair in loose waves instead of the severe bun I'd adopted as part of my workplace camouflage. My makeup was still professional, but with an artistry I'd previously suppressed. Small changes, but meaningful. Once the suit fit perfectly, as if waiting patiently all this time for its moment. As I fastened the last button, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me, like reconnecting with an old friend. My phone chimed with a message from James. Car will collect you at 8:30, board meeting at 9:15. Richard scheduled for 10 SAO. Perfect timing. I'd be there for the formal vote, present when ownership officially transferred, positioned to welcome Richard when he arrived for his grand performance. The town car James sent was understated but luxurious. Black exterior, cream leather interior. A discreet driver who opened my door without comment, but with an approving nod at my appearance. The city crawled by outside my window. Morning commuters hurrying through crosswalks, vendors setting up coffee carts. The rhythm of a workday beginning that would end very differently than it started. We pulled up to Vantage headquarters at precisely 8:45. The lobby security guard did a double take as I passed, not because I looked out of place, but because I suddenly looked like I belonged in a way Rebecca, the marketing manager, never had. The elevator was crowded with early arrivals. Several colleagues glanced my way with momentary confusion before recognition dawned, followed by awkward smiles. I nodded politely but said nothing, enjoying their uncertainty about how to categorize this transformed version of the woman they'd overlooked for so long. Instead of heading to my office, I took the elevator to the 18th floor, executive, territory where I'd rarely been invited. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner, with views of both the river and the city skyline. James was already there, reviewing documents with 2 attorneys and the current CEO, Thomas Whitfield, a semi-retired founder who had grown increasingly disengaged over the years, allowing Richard and his allies to effectively run the company. Rebecca, Thomas greeted me with mild surprise. Are you presenting the marketing report today? Before I could answer, James intervened smoothly. Rebecca is here at my request, Thomas. All will become clear shortly. Board members began arriving, hanging expensive coats, accepting coffee from the executive assistant stationed discreetly in the corner. A few glanced curiously in my direction, but none addressed me directly. In their world, marketing managers were functionaries, not peers worthy of acknowledgement. At 9:15 sharp, Thomas called the meeting to order. As you all know, we're here to formalize the acquisition of Vantage Technologies by Abernathy Holdings. James Abernathy has joined us to finalize the terms and introduce the transition team. James rose, buttoning his bespoke suit jacket. Thank you, Thomas. Before we proceed with the formal vote, I'd like to clarify something important about this acquisition. The board members leaned forward slightly, sensing something unexpected. Abernathy Holdings is facilitating this transaction, but we are not the actual purchaser of Vantage Technologies. James paused, allowing the confusion to register across the faces around the table. The company is being acquired by Taylor Innovation Group, headed by its founder and CEO, Rebecca Taylor. Every head turned toward me. Thomas blinked rapidly. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Rebecca is our marketing manager," I smiled. "I'm both, actually. I founded Taylor Innovation Group 8 years ago, built it into a successful marketing strategy firm, and sold it to create an investment fund focused on undervalued companies with growth potential. Vantage caught my attention, and I wanted to understand it from the inside before making an offer." Stunned silence filled the room. One board member, Gregory Peters, Richard's frequent golf partner, actually laughed. "This is a joke, right? She's a mid-level manager. She drives a Honda." "A very reliable Honda," I acknowledged pleasantly. "And yes, for the past 15 months, I've worked as a mid-level manager here, observing Vantage's operations, culture, and untapped potential firsthand. My offer, which you've all reviewed and preliminarily approved, was made based on that direct knowledge." James distributed folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find verification of Ms. Taylor's credentials, financials for Taylor Innovation Group, and documentation of the funding structure for this acquisition. Everything is in order. The next 20 minutes unfolded in a blur of questions, clarifications, and gradually dawning acceptance. The board members ranged from shocked to impressed to vaguely offended that they'd been deceived, however legally and ethically. Thomas seemed the most bewildered, struggling to reconcile the unassuming marketing manager with the businesswoman now revealed. "But why the subterfuge?" he finally asked. "Why not approach us directly as a potential buyer?" I met his gaze steadily. "Because the view from the top is often incomplete. I needed to understand Vantage's true operational reality, not just what would be presented in formal due diligence. I wanted to know its people, its processes, its problems, and its potential, without the filter of executive presentations." By 9:50, the initial shock had worn off enough to proceed with the formal vote. It passed unanimously. The deal was too financially attractive to reject, regardless of the unusual circumstances. As board members signed the final documents, I felt a curious mix of emotions: satisfaction at reaching this milestone, anticipation of what came next, and a strange nostalgia for the simplicity of being underestimated. At 9:58, James checked his watch. "I believe Richard Harmon will be joining us momentarily for his presentation on departmental restructuring?" Thomas nodded. "He's been quite insistent about sharing his vision for Vantage's future under new ownership." "Perfect," I said, straightening my jacket and moving to the seat at the head of the table, the position traditionally reserved for the CEO. "I'm looking forward to hearing it." The boardroom door opened precisely at Tenerias. Richard entered with confident strides, leather portfolio tucked under one arm, expression set in what he clearly thought was visionary determination. He faltered slightly when he saw me, confusion flickering across his face before he recovered. "Good morning, everyone," he began, nodding to the board members. "I appreciate the opportunity to—" He stopped abruptly, finally processing my presence. At the head of the table, the changed dynamics in the room. "Rebecca, why are you sitting there? This is a board-level presentation about executive restructuring." I smiled. "Yes, Richard, I know exactly what your presentation is about. Please continue. I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on who's worthless to this organization." Richard stood frozen, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the first flickers of genuine fear. The portfolio he'd been clutching slipped slightly in his grasp. "I don't understand," he said finally, gaze darting from me to Thomas to James, searching for explanation. "What's happening here?" Thomas cleared his throat awkwardly. Richard, there's been a significant development. Vantage has been acquired by Taylor Innovation Group, headed by Rebecca. The board has just approved the sale. Richard blinked rapidly, information refusing to compute. Taylor Innovation? But that's not Abernathy Holdings. No, James confirmed pleasantly. My firm merely facilitated the transaction. Ms. Taylor is the actual purchaser. Richard stared at me, recognition slowly dawning. You can't be. This is some kind of joke. Not a joke, I replied calmly. Though I understand your confusion. You've spent 15 months underestimating me after all. The blood drained from Richard's face as implications cascaded through his mind. Every dismissive comment, every public criticism, every project stolen, every casual cruelty, all directed at the woman who now controlled his professional fate. Please, I gestured to the presentation screen. Don't let this interrupt your scheduled presentation. The board and I were just discussing the future leadership structure of Vantage. Your insights would be illuminating. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he set his portfolio on the table. I think perhaps we should reschedule in light of this development. I'd like to prepare a more appropriate... But you've already prepared this presentation, I interrupted, my tone reasonable but unyielding. And I'm particularly interested in your proposal for reorganizing the marketing department, the one that divides functions into strategic communications reporting to you, and support services under my management. Several board members shifted, uncomfortably. Gregory Peters studied his manicured nails with sudden fascination. That was merely a preliminary concept. Richard backpedaled, sweat beading at his hairline. A thought exercise, really. Nothing formalized. Yet you presented it to my team yesterday as approved and non-negotiable, I noted. Interesting how quickly the status of a proposal can change. Richard swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing against his starched collar. Rebecca, if I somehow gave that impression, it was a miscommunication. I've always valued your contributions to Vantage. James made a small noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. I maintained my composure, though something hot and fierce burned beneath my professional veneer. Not hatred or even anger, but a profound intolerance for dishonesty. Let's not rewrite history, Richard, I said evenly. Just 3 days ago, you called me completely worthless to this organization, in front of the entire executive team. Yesterday, you attempted to dismantle my department without authorization. Your assessment of my value has been consistent, if nothing else. Richard's eyes widened in panic. That was taken out of context. I was merely providing constructive feedback on specific deliverables, not making a personal, please don't compound disrespect with dishonesty. I cut him off, my voice still measured, but with an edge that silenced him instantly. Everyone in this room knows exactly what kind of leader you've been. I stood, buttoning my jacket in a deliberate echo of how James had done so earlier. A small gesture of authority. Since your presentation seems to be experiencing technical difficulties, allow me to share my vision for Vantage's future instead. With practiced ease, I connected my laptop to the presentation system. The screen illuminated with the organizational blueprint I'd finalized the night before. Vantage has tremendous untapped potential, I began, addressing the board while Richard remained standing awkwardly, neither fully presenting nor seated as an audience member. But realizing that potential requires structural changes, not just in reporting lines, but in how we value contribution, foster innovation, and develop talent. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined my vision for a transformed Vantage, detailed, data-driven, and ambitious without being unrealistic. Throughout my presentation, Richard remained caught in his liminal position, frozen between his former power and his uncertain future. When I concluded, the boardroom fell silent for a moment before Thomas spoke. That's quite comprehensive, Rebecca. I'm impressed with your understanding of Vantage's operations, though I suppose that was the purpose of your unusual approach. Precisely, I nodded. Understanding comes before transformation. Gregory Peters leaned forward. This all sounds wonderful in theory, but implementing such significant changes requires experienced leadership. His gaze flicked meaningfully toward Richard, a last desperate attempt to protect his ally. I agree completely, I replied. Which is why I've spent the past 8 years building and leading successful organizations, and the past 15 months studying Vantage from within. I assure you, I have the leadership experience necessary. Richard finally found his voice again. If I may, he began, a strange new deference in his tone. Perhaps we could discuss how my expertise might contribute to this new vision? I've been with Vantage for 12 years, after all. That institutional knowledge has value. It was the first sensible thing he'd said all morning, a naked plea for job preservation wrapped in business logic. I studied him thoughtfully, noting how quickly he'd pivoted from dominant to supplicant when the power dynamics shifted. You're right about one thing, Richard. Institutional knowledge does have value. I turned to address the broader room, which is why no immediate staffing changes will be announced today. Everyone at Vantage will have the opportunity to demonstrate how they align with our new direction. Relief flashed across Richard's face, quickly masked by professional neutrality. He thought he'd been granted a reprieve. However, I continued, alignment requires more than lip service to new values. It requires demonstrated behavior that supports those values. Some of you will adapt naturally to a culture that prizes collaboration over competition, innovation over conformity, and respect over intimidation. Others will find the adjustment more challenging. My gaze returned to Richard, holding his eyes, long enough to make sure he understood. But everyone will be evaluated by the same standards. No exceptions, no special treatment, just genuine contribution and conduct worthy of the organization we're building. The meeting concluded shortly after, board members filing out with hushed conversations and backward glances. James gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before departing for another appointment. Only Richard lingered, clearly hoping for a private word. When the room had emptied except for us, he approached cautiously, like someone nearing an unpredictable animal. "Rebecca," he began, voice uncharacteristically humble. "I want to apologize for any misunderstandings between us. Perhaps we could start fresh. I have valuable insights that could help your transition." "Our transition," I corrected him mildly. "Vantage's transition." "Yes, of course," he amended quickly. "Our transition. I'd like to be part of that future. I think you'll find I can be quite adaptable to new leadership styles." I regarded him steadily. Richard Harmon, who had spent years creating a culture of fear and favoritism, now scrambling to reinvent himself as a team player. It would have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. The future of Vantage has room for many kinds of talent, Richard. Whether it has room for you depends entirely on your actions moving forward, not your promises in this moment. I gathered my materials, preparing to leave. I suggest you begin by speaking with your team, the real conversations you've been avoiding. Listen more than you speak. You might be surprised what you learn. As I walked out of the boardroom, leaving Richard still standing there, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. 15 months of calculated diminishment, of strategic patience, had culminated not in revenge, but in opportunity. Not just for me, but for everyone at Vantage who deserved better than what they'd been given. Word travels with astonishing speed in corporate environments, especially news that reshapes power structures. By the time I reached the elevator, my phone was already buzzing with messages. Colleagues who'd somehow heard snippets of what had transpired, industry contacts who'd caught wind of the acquisition, my team members confused by the flurry of activity on the executive floor. I didn't respond immediately. First, I needed to address the people who had been directly affected by Richard's leadership, beginning with my marketing team. I texted Zoe. Conference room D, 11:15. Please gather the entire marketing department. Important announcement. The elevator doors opened on the 15th floor to reveal a subtly altered landscape. Employees who had previously hurried past without acknowledgement now paused, offering tentative smiles or curious glances. Jennifer, Richard's assistant, was visibly flustered at her desk, phone pressed to her ear, eyes widening as she saw me approach. "He's on his way down now," she whispered, into the receiver before hanging up abruptly. "Good morning, Ms. Taylor. Mr. Harmon asked me to inform you he's rescheduling his meetings to make himself available for transition discussions at your convenience." I smiled. "Thank you, Jennifer. And please, it's still Rebecca." Her expression betrayed her disbelief. Office hierarchies were rigid constructs in her mind. If I was now the boss, surely I expected the formalities that Richard had demanded. "Actually, Jennifer, I'd appreciate a moment of your time if you can spare it." Surprise flickered across her face. "Of course. Certainly. Yes." She scrambled to follow me into Richard's. No, my office now, I supposed, though I had no intention of moving in immediately. I closed the door and gestured for her to sit, taking the visitor's chair myself rather than positioning behind the imposing desk. Another small subversion of the power dynamics Richard had cultivated. "You've worked with Richard for how long now?" 7 years, Jennifer replied cautiously. "That's a significant investment of your professional life. You must know every aspect of Vantage's executive operations." She nodded, still uncertain where this conversation was heading. "I imagine those 7 years haven't always been easy," I continued gently. "Richard can be demanding." Jennifer's professional mask slipped, just slightly. "It's been educational," she offered diplomatically. "I'm sure it has, which is why I wanted to speak with you directly before rumors and speculation take over. Vantage is entering a period of significant change, not just in ownership, but in values and practices. The culture Richard created isn't the culture I intend to perpetuate." Jennifer studied me, calculation replacing caution in her expression. She was reassessing me, trying to determine if this was some elaborate test of loyalty. "I'm not asking you to criticize your boss," I clarified, "but I do want you to know that your experience and institutional knowledge are valuable to me and that you have options beyond continuing as Richard's assistant, should you wish to explore them." "Options?" she repeated, the word clearly unfamiliar in her professional context. "There will be several new positions created in the executive office. An operations coordinator role, for instance, with greater responsibility and corresponding compensation. Someone who understands how Vantage actually functions would be an ideal candidate." I watched realization dawn across Jennifer's face. Not just that her professional landscape was changing, but that she was being seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her Vantage career. I don't know what to say," she managed finally. "You don't need to say anything right now," I assured her. "Just know that your contributions haven't gone unnoticed, even when they weren't acknowledged. We'll talk more specifically about opportunities next week." As she left my office, I could almost see the protective armor she'd developed under Richard's regime beginning to crack. It would take time for people to trust that the changes were genuine, to believe they could be valued for more than their ability to navigate toxic dynamics. I checked my watch, almost time for the marketing team meeting. On impulse, I decided to take a different route to conference room D, one that would take me past the creative department where Amara and her designers worked. As I passed, conversations hushed, heads turned. Mike, a senior designer who had rarely spoken directly to me before, actually stepped out of his cubicle to intercept me. "Rebecca," he began awkwardly, "there's a rumor going around that things are changing upstairs?" I smiled. "Some things are changing, yes. I'll be making a formal announcement to the whole company this afternoon. But the marketing team, Is gathering in about 10 minutes if you'd like to join us. His eyebrows rose. Marketing and creative together? Richard always kept departmental announcements separate. I know, I replied simply. That's one of the things that's changing. By the time I reached conference room D, it was already filling beyond capacity. Not just my marketing team, but people from creative, digital, even a few curious faces from accounts. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of anxiety, excitement, and raw curiosity. Zoe had saved me a seat at the front, her expression a silent question mark. I shook my head slightly. Explanations would come in due course. Once the room settled, I moved to the position where everyone could see me, taking in the assembled faces. Some I knew well from our daily work together. Others I'd interacted with only peripherally, kept separate by Richard's deliberate departmental siloing. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began. Especially those of you who weren't specifically invited but found your way here anyway. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. That curiosity, that initiative, it's exactly what Vantage has been missing, and exactly what we're going to nurture moving forward. I paused, letting my gaze connect with individual faces around the room. As some of you may have already heard, Vantage Technologies was acquired this morning by Taylor Innovation Group. What you may not know is that I founded that group, and as of today, I am Vantage's new CEO. The room erupted in murmurs and shocked exchanges. Dev actually dropped the pen he'd been fidgeting with. Amara's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. I know this is unexpected, I continued once the initial commotion subsided. For the past 15 months, I've worked alongside you as a mid-level manager, deliberately keeping my background and intentions private, while I learned the true operational reality of Vantage, not just its official structures, but its unofficial ones. The unwritten rules, the hidden obstacles, the untapped potential. I moved away from the front table, walking slowly around the perimeter of the room as I spoke. I've witnessed extraordinary talent constrained by arbitrary limitations. I've seen brilliant ideas dismissed because they came from the wrong people. I've watched collaboration stifled in favor of competition. Stopping behind Amara's chair, I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. I've seen a creative director whose campaign concept was called pedestrian go on to win industry awards when that same concept was presented under someone else's name. Amara's eyes widened. She'd never told me about that incident, but I'd done my research, tracked the campaign's evolution from her original presentation to its eventual execution under Richard's personal supervision. Moving on, I paused beside Dev. I've watched a brilliant data analyst passed over for promotion in favor of someone whose greatest qualification was their connection to management. Recognition and validation rippled through the room. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns, experiences shared by many but rarely acknowledged openly. All of that changes today, I declared, returning to the front of the room. Not through some magical overnight transformation, but through deliberate, consistent rebuilding of how we work together, how we recognize contribution, how we define success. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my immediate vision for restructuring, not Richard's superficial reshuffling designed to consolidate his power, but fundamental changes that would break down silos, create cross-functional teams, and establish transparent pathways for advancement. I invited questions, acknowledged concerns, and promised more detailed discussions in the coming days. As the meeting concluded, people lingered, forming small clusters of animated conversation. Zoe approached, shaking her head in wonderment. 15 months, she marveled. All this time you were just Rebecca, I finished for her. That part wasn't an act. The difference is that now I can be all of Rebecca, not just the parts that fit into Richard's organizational chart. Does he know? Dev asked, joining us. Richard, I mean, has he? He knows, I confirmed, though I suspect he's still processing the implications. Amara laughed, a sound of pure delight. I would have paid good money to see his face. It wasn't about humiliating him, I clarified, though I understood the sentiment. It was about creating the necessary conditions for real change. And are we? Dev asked quietly. Really changing, I mean. Or just swapping one boss for another? It was a fair question. Skepticism born from too many false promises of organizational transformation that had ultimately reinforced existing power structures. That's the right question to ask, I acknowledged. And the honest answer is that real change depends not just on me, but on all of us. I can remove barriers and create opportunities, but cultural transformation happens through countless daily choices about how we work together, how we solve problems, how we treat each other. I glanced at my watch. I need to prepare for the company-wide announcement this afternoon, but my door is open, literally and figuratively. The days of carefully managed access to leadership are over. As I left the conference room, I felt a subtle shift in the air around me. Not deference or intimidation, the twin currencies Richard had traded in, but something more valuable. Cautious hope. It was just the beginning, a fragile seedling that would need consistent nurturing to grow into the culture I envisioned. But for the first time in 15 months, I could nurture it as my whole self. Not as Rebecca the overlooked, but as Rebecca. The builder, the visionary, the leader I had always been. The company-wide announcement was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the largest conference space Vantage had, a room typically reserved for client presentations and holiday parties. As employees filed in, the energy was palpable. A current of anticipation running through conversations. Those who had attended my earlier meeting with the marketing team carried themselves differently, exchanging knowing glances with colleagues who were still unaware of the full story. I stood at the back, observing. Richard was conspicuously absent. After our boardroom encounter, he had reportedly retreated to his office, emerging only briefly to instruct Jennifer to cancel his remaining appointments. His absence spoke volumes. The first time in Vantage's recent history that a significant company meeting would proceed without his dominating presence. Thomas Whitfield took the stage first, his usual casual confidence strained by the morning's revelations. He fumbled through a brief introduction about exciting new developments and strategic directional shifts before awkwardly introducing me as both a familiar colleague and the company's new owner. The ripple of shock that moved through the room was almost visible. A wave of raised eyebrows, whispered exclamations, and disbelieving stares. I approached the podium with measured steps, giving everyone time to process this first surprising piece of information. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice, I began, my voice carrying easily through the hushed room. As Thomas mentioned, today marks a significant transition for Vantage Technologies. I recognize this news comes as a surprise, especially to those who have known me only as a marketing manager for the past 15 months. I paused, scanning the sea of faces. Some showed confusion, others curiosity. A few, particularly those who had experienced Richard's more brutal management tactics, displayed something close to hope. Let me start by introducing myself properly. My name is Rebecca Taylor. Before joining Vantage, I founded and built Taylor Innovation Group, a marketing strategy firm that pioneered collaborative approaches to digital campaigns. After selling that company, I created an investment fund focused on identifying organizations with untapped potential, companies where structural and cultural changes could unlock extraordinary growth. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I continued, moving away from the podium to create a more direct connection. Vantage caught my attention because of its talented people and its unrealized possibilities. But rather than making assumptions based on financial reports and executive presentations, I wanted to understand the company from within, to experience its day-to-day operations, its unwritten rules, its challenges and strengths firsthand. Understanding. dawned on more faces now. Emily from HR actually gasped audibly as pieces fell into place. So, for the past 15 months, I've worked alongside many of you as a mid-level manager, deliberately setting aside my previous experience and accomplishments to gain an unfiltered perspective on what makes Vantage work and what holds it back from excellence. I moved to the center of the stage, abandoning the formal presentation setup entirely. What I discovered was both encouraging and concerning. I found extraordinary talent throughout every department: creative minds, analytical thinkers, dedicated professionals constrained by hierarchies that reward conformity over innovation. I witnessed brilliant ideas dismissed because they came from unexpected sources. I experienced firsthand how arbitrary power can diminish potential. The room had grown so quiet that the soft hum of the ventilation system seemed loud by comparison. Everyone knew exactly who had wielded that arbitrary power, though I hadn't mentioned Richard by name. As of this morning, Taylor Innovation Group has completed its acquisition of Vantage Technologies. The board has approved the transition, and I now stand before you not just as your colleague, but as your CEO. This dual perspective, as both leader and team member, will guide how we transform Vantage together. For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision for the company's future, not with vague corporate platitudes, but with specific structural changes, cultural shifts, and measurable goals. I spoke about breaking down departmental silos, implementing transparent promotion pathways, creating collaborative project teams, and establishing mentorship programs. Throughout my presentation, I acknowledged both the excitement and anxiety that accompany significant change. I didn't promise that the AI transition would be easy, or that every position would remain unchanged. But I did commit to fairness, transparency, and recognition of genuine contribution regardless of title or tenure. When I opened the floor for questions, hands shot up immediately. The first came from Carlos in accounting, who had been with Vantage for nearly a decade. "Will there be layoffs?" he asked bluntly, voicing the fear uppermost in many minds. "I have no plans for broad workforce reductions," I assured him. "This acquisition isn't about cost-cutting or asset stripping. It's about growth through transformation. That said, certain roles may evolve as our structure changes, and not everyone will embrace the new direction. My commitment is that any staffing changes will be based on alignment with our values and contribution to our goals, not on personal relationships or historical hierarchies." The next question came from Diane in Client Services. "What happens to leadership? Will Richard Harmon remain as COO?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to what everyone was wondering. I took a moment before answering, choosing my words carefully. All current executives, including Richard, have been invited to continue, with Vantage in transitional roles while we determine the leadership structure that best supports our new direction. Some may find alignment with our evolving culture. Others may decide to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Those decisions will unfold over the coming weeks. More questions followed, about client relationships, project continuity, reporting structures, even the physical office layout, which had traditionally segregated departments in ways that hindered collaboration. I answered each one directly, neither sugarcoating challenges nor making grandiose promises I couldn't keep. As the formal Q&A concluded, I made one final announcement. There will be no regular work tomorrow. Instead, we're holding a company-wide strategy day, a chance for everyone to contribute ideas about how we can build a better Vantage. Your team leads will share details by end of day. For now, I invite you all to an informal reception in the main lobby. Consider it both a celebration of what's beginning and an acknowledgement of your contributions that have brought us to this point. The unexpected invitation to celebrate, so different from Richard's emphasis on perpetual striving without recognition, seemed to release a collective tension. As people filed out toward the promised reception, conversations sparked with new energy, speculation giving way to tentative excitement. I lingered on stage, accepting congratulations and fielding additional questions from employees who hadn't spoken up during the formal session. From my vantage point, I could see new connections forming, colleagues from different departments engaging in conversations that would have been unlikely under the previous regime. James appeared at my side, having slipped in during the presentation. "Masterfully handled," he murmured. "You struck the perfect balance between authority and approachability." "The real work is just beginning," I reminded him, watching as groups formed and reformed across the lobby. "Announcing change is easy. Implementing it is where most transformations falter." But most transformations don't have the advantage of a leader who's already walked in everyone's shoes. James nodded toward a cluster of my former marketing team members who were animatedly explaining something to colleagues from engineering. "You've earned a foundation of trust that most new CEOs never achieve." He wasn't wrong. My unusual approach had created a unique leadership position. I understood Vantage both from above and within, a perspective that would prove invaluable in the challenging months ahead. As the impromptu celebration continued, I noticed a familiar figure observing from the periphery. Richard stood near the exit, expression unreadable, watching the proceedings with carefully masked emotions. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded lobby. I offered a small, neutral nod of acknowledgement. After a moment's hesitation, he returned, the gesture before slipping out the door. It was a small moment, unremarkable to anyone who might have noticed. But it represented something important, the beginning of a recalibration. Not friendship or forgiveness necessarily, but a recognition that our professional relationship had entered entirely new territory. Whether Richard could adapt to that territory remained to be seen. I turned my attention back to the gathering, to the spark of possibility illuminating conversations throughout the room. This, not Richard's reaction, not even the official acquisition, was what truly mattered. The cultural shift already taking root, the reimagining of what Vantage could become. For 15 months, I had diminished myself to understand a broken system from within. Now, standing fully in my power, I could see that the understanding gained was worth every moment of being underestimated. The woman once dismissed as worthless now held not just the company's future in her hands, but something more valuable, the insight to transform it into something truly extraordinary. 3 months passed like a whirlwind of motion and transformation. Vantage's offices had been redesigned, walls literally torn down between departments, replaced with collaborative spaces where cross-functional teams could interact naturally. The executive floor, once an isolated fortress accessible only to the privileged few, now housed communal meeting areas and a bustling innovation lab. My own office was modest, with glass walls that symbolized the transparency I'd promised. On this particular morning, I arrived earlier than usual, coffee in hand, pausing to appreciate the quiet energy of the space before it filled with people. The sun streamed through east-facing windows, illuminating project boards covered with colorful notes and sketches, evidence of the creative renaissance taking place. This wasn't just cosmetic change. In 12 short weeks, Vantage had secured 4 major new clients, retained all existing accounts despite the leadership transition, and implemented a mentorship program that paired senior talent with promising employees regardless of department. Morale surveys showed marked improvement. Sick days had decreased by 22%. Even our industry competitors had taken notice, with trade publications running features on our revolutionary restructuring. Not everything had been smooth. Of course, some employees, too entrenched in the old power structures, had chosen to leave. Others required consistent reassurance that the changes were genuine and permanent. A few client relationships had needed extra attention during the transition, but the trajectory was unmistakably upward. As for Richard Harmon, his story had taken an unexpected turn. Our first one-on-one meeting after the acquisition had been tense, to put it mildly. He'd arrived with a carefully practiced humility that didn't quite reach his eyes, armed with proposals for how he could add value in the new organization. I'd listened patiently, noting how different his approach was now that our positions had reversed. "You've clearly given this considerable thought," I'd told him after he finished his presentation. "But I'm curious, why do you want to stay at Vantage? You have connections, experience? There are other companies where your traditional leadership style might be more aligned with existing culture." The question had visibly startled him. "I've invested 12 years in this company," he'd replied, defaulting to indignation before catching himself. "I mean, I believe in Vantage's potential. I've always believed in it." "You've believed in what Vantage could do for you," I'd corrected gently. "I'm asking why you want to be part of what we're building now, a company that operates on fundamentally different principles than those you've championed throughout your career." Richard had gone quiet then, his practiced responses failing him. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, genuine reflection crossed his face. "Because I don't want to be that person anymore," he'd finally said, so softly I almost didn't hear him. The one who... He'd trailed off, unable or unwilling to articulate exactly what kind of leader he'd been. The one who calls team members worthless in front of their colleagues, I'd offered. The one who takes credit for others' work. The one who cultivates fear instead of growth. He'd flinched at each example but didn't deny them. "Yes," he'd acknowledged, a single syllable that seemed physically difficult for him to produce. "I've been reconsidering certain approaches." It wasn't an apology. Richard wasn't capable of that level of vulnerability yet, but it was something unprecedented, an admission that his methods might have been flawed. "Transformation isn't my area of expertise," he'd continued after a moment. "But adaptation is. I can adapt." I'd studied him carefully, searching for the calculation behind his apparent sincerity. There was some there, certainly. Richard would always be strategic in his interactions, but also something I hadn't expected: genuine uncertainty. For a man who had built his identity on projecting absolute confidence, this visible doubt represented a significant crack in his armor. "Here's what I'm offering," I'd told him finally. "Not a C-suite position, not a management role, a 6-month special project focused on client retention during our transition. Your experience and relationships have value there. At the end of that period, we'll evaluate next steps based on results, and, more importantly, how you approach the work." He'd been visibly taken aback by the limitations of the offer. "You want me to give up my leadership responsibilities? My team?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to demonstrate that you can create value without authority over others," I'd clarified. "To prove that your worth to this company isn't dependent on your position in a hierarchy." It had been a test, of course. One I'd fully expected him to fail, storming out to seek employment elsewhere, where his old tactics would still be rewarded. Instead, after several days of consideration, he'd surprised me by accepting. That had been 11 weeks ago. Richard's journey since then had been fascinating to observe, a case study in whether someone so deeply invested in traditional power structures could truly evolve. He'd approached the client retention project with characteristic intensity but uncharacteristic collaboration, actually listening to input from team members he would have previously dismissed. There had been setbacks and moments of reversion to old patterns. During one particularly tense client meeting, he'd attempted to pull rank, only to be gently but firmly corrected by Amara, who reminded him of the new collaborative approach we'd promised the client. His face had flushed with anger and embarrassment, but he'd managed to recover without the retribution that would have once followed such a challenge. Today marked the halfway point of Richard's 6-month project, and our scheduled review meeting appeared on my calendar for 10:00 a.m. As employees began arriving for the day, filling the office with morning greetings and the scent of fresh coffee, I reviewed the data on his progress. The numbers were undeniable. Client retention exceeded our transition targets by 17%. Satisfaction scores had improved across all accounts under his supervision. Most surprisingly, feedback from team members working with Richard indicated significant improvement in his communication style and willingness to share credit. Zoe poked her head into my office just as I was finishing my review. "The development team is ready for you in Think Tank 2, she reminded me. "Final presentation on the Armstrong platform." "Integration. Thanks, I'll be right there." I gathered my tablet and notes, still pondering the Richard situation. This wasn't the simple resolution I'd anticipated when I'd acquired Vantage, either a dramatic confrontation ending in his departure or the superficial compliance of someone biding their time until they could reclaim power. Instead, we were witnessing something more complex: the halting, inconsistent, but seemingly genuine effort of someone attempting to unlearn deeply ingrained behaviors. It raised fascinating questions about human capacity for change, about whether someone who had wielded power destructively could learn to contribute constructively without it. The morning flew by in a series of productive meetings. Our development team had made remarkable progress on the Armstrong integration, a project that would have taken months longer under the previous siloed structure. The creative presentation for New Edge Industries had evolved from strong to exceptional through collaboration between departments that had previously competed for resources and recognition. At 9:55, I returned to my office to prepare for my meeting with Richard. He arrived precisely on time, dressed in the same impeccable suits he'd always favored, but somehow carrying himself differently. Less entitled swagger, more focused intentionality. "Rebecca," he greeted me, taking the offered seat across from my desk. "I've been looking forward to this review." "As have I," I replied, noticing how he'd placed his portfolio on the table, but didn't immediately launch into a presentation as he would have in the past. "Why don't you start by sharing your assessment of the project thus far?" Richard nodded, taking a measured breath before speaking. "The client retention initiative has exceeded numerical targets, which the data clearly shows. But I think the more significant progress has been in how we're approaching client relationships fundamentally differently than before." "How so?" I prompted, curious about his perspective. "We're actually listening," he said simply. "Not just to respond or to sell, but to understand. The collaborative teams are surfacing insights and solutions that never would have emerged in our previous structure." He paused, seeming to wrestle with what to say next. "I've been studying the difference between how projects developed under my previous management style versus the current approach. The results are illuminating. Teams I directly controlled produced safe, predictable work. Teams empowered to solve problems collaboratively are producing breakthrough innovations." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised by this level of self-reflection. That's a significant observation, especially coming from someone who once told me that leadership is about making people do what they otherwise wouldn't. Richard winced slightly at having his words quoted back to him. "I believed that," he acknowledged, "for a long time. I'm not sure I do anymore." Our conversation continued for nearly an hour, digging into specific accounts, team dynamics, and strategic direction. Throughout, I observed a man in transition, sometimes falling back into old patterns of self-promotion, other times displaying genuine curiosity about approaches that contradicted everything he'd previously championed. As our meeting drew to a close, I offered my evaluation. "The client retention project is objectively successful, Richard. You've leveraged your experience and relationships effectively while adapting to new methodologies. The question now is where we go from here." He nodded, a hint of his old confidence returning. "I've been thinking about that. I'd like to propose an expanded role focusing on client strategy across departments, not managing people," he clarified quickly, "but facilitating connections between client needs and our evolving capabilities." I considered his proposal, testing it against my ongoing assessment of his transformation. Was this genuine evolution, or merely adaptive mimicry? learning to speak the language of the new culture while maintaining old values beneath the surface. Before we discuss next steps, I said finally, I want to ask you something I've been curious about since the acquisition. When you called me worthless in that meeting 3 months ago, did you actually believe it? Or was it simply a power move, a way to maintain your position by diminishing others? The question clearly caught him off guard. For a moment, the polished professional facade slipped, revealing something raw and uncertain beneath. I didn't, he began, then stopped himself. The truth is, I didn't think about you as a person at all in that moment. You were just an obstacle to what I wanted, a piece that didn't fit my vision for the department. If calling you worthless kept others in line, cemented my authority, then that's what I would say. The honesty was startling, both in its self-awareness and its casual cruelty. But it was also perhaps the first step towards something resembling genuine change. Thank you for that transparency, I said quietly. It's the most valuable contribution you've made to Vantage so far. 1 year after the acquisition, Vantage Technologies gathered for its annual summit at the Ocean View Resort, a 3-day event combining strategic planning, team building, and celebration of our remarkable transformation. The same resort, ironically, where Richard had once hosted executive retreats while deliberately excluding those he deemed unworthy of participation. This time, every department was represented. Administrative assistants mingled with department heads. New hires engaged in animated conversations with company veterans. The artificial boundaries that had once defined Vantage's culture had dissolved, replaced by a collaborative energy that had propelled us to our most successful year in company history. I stood on the beachfront terrace, watching the sunset paint, the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The path hadn't been straight or simple. We'd navigated resistance to change, overcome ingrained habits, and rebuilt systems from the ground up. There had been difficult conversations, necessary departures, and moments of uncertainty when the magnitude of what we were attempting had seemed overwhelming. But we had persevered, guided by a vision of what Vantage could become when talent was unleashed rather than constrained. The results spoke for themselves. Revenue up 32%, employee retention improved by 41%, and industry recognition including 3 major awards for innovation that had eluded the company throughout its previous existence. "Penny for your thoughts," said a familiar voice behind me. I turned to find Amara approaching, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She offered one to me with a smile. "Just reflecting on how far we've come," I replied, accepting the glass with a nod of thanks. "Remember where we were this time last year?" Amara laughed, the sound carrying freely on the ocean breeze. How could I forget? I was hiding campaign concepts in locked drawers because I was afraid they'd be stolen and presented as someone else's work. "And now?" I prompted, though I already knew the answer. "Now I'm leading the innovation team that just landed the Westridge account, the biggest in company history." She shook her head in wonder. Sometimes I still can't believe the transformation. We clinked glasses in quiet celebration. Amara, once relegated to executing others' visions, had blossomed into one of our most visionary leaders. Her promotion, 6 months ago, had sent a powerful message throughout the organization. At the new Vantage, talent and contribution determined advancement, not politics or favoritism. The team presentations today were exceptional, I observed. Particularly the collaborative approach Dev and Marketing proposed for the Digital Transformation Initiative. That's what happens when you tear down walls, literal and figurative. Amara replied, "Ideas flow. Innovation happens naturally." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. In the main pavilion behind us, the evening reception was getting underway. Laughter and conversation drifted through the open doors, punctuated by occasional applause as colleagues acknowledged each other's contributions. "Have you seen Richard tonight?" Amara asked, her tone carefully neutral. I nodded. Briefly during the afternoon sessions, he seemed engaged. Richard's journey over the past year had continued to surprise everyone, myself included. After our 6-month review, I'd approved his proposal for a specialized client strategy role, not the executive position he'd once held, but one that valued his experience while keeping him firmly accountable to collaborative processes. He'd accepted with what appeared to be genuine gratitude, setting aside the entitlement that had once defined his interactions. The transformation hadn't been seamless. There had been moments of regression, flashes of the old Richard emerging, when pressure mounted or when initiatives moved in directions he hadn't anticipated. But each time he'd caught himself more quickly, course-correcting with increasing awareness. Most remarkably, he'd developed what appeared to be authentic working relationships with team members he'd previously dismissed, including Amara, whose creative direction he now actively sought rather than undermined. He apologized to me yesterday, Amara said suddenly, swirling the champagne in her glass. Actually said the words, "I'm sorry for taking credit for the Hendricks campaign 2 years ago." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. That's significant. That's what I thought. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a quiet moment after the strategy session. But it felt real. She paused, considering. People can change, can't they? Even when you're convinced they can't. Some can, I agreed, when they choose to, when given the right environment and incentives. But it starts with that choice. Our conversation was interrupted by Zoe, who approached with tablet in hand. Sorry to intrude, she said, though her bright expression suggested the interruption brought good news. The quarterly projections just came in from finance. We've exceeded targets across all divisions. That calls for another toast, Amara declared, waving over a passing server with a tray of champagne flutes. To exceeding expectations. As glasses clinked, Dev and his analytics team joined our growing circle, followed by members of creative and client services. The impromptu gathering swelled, conversations overlapping, ideas sparking between departments that had once been isolated from each other. I stepped back slightly, taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction. This organic collaboration, this genuine camaraderie, was what I'd envisioned when I'd first considered acquiring Vantage. Not just financial success, but human success. A workplace where people thrived rather than merely survived. From across the terrace, I noticed Richard, observing the gathering, standing slightly apart as he often did these days. Our eyes met briefly, and he raised his glass in a small gesture of acknowledgement. I returned the gesture, recognizing the complexity of our shared history and the unexpected path it had taken. Later that evening, after dinner and presentations, celebrating the year's achievements, I found a moment of solitude on a quiet section of beach. The moon cast a silver path across the water, waves gently lapping at the shore. I'd slipped away not from any desire to escape the celebration, but to fully absorb the significance of what we'd accomplished. Footsteps in the sand announced someone's approach. I turned to find Richard, his formal dinner attire at odds with the casual setting. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, maintaining a respectful distance. I gestured to the open beach beside me. "It's a perfect night for reflection." He nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon where ocean met sky. "I've been doing a lot of that lately, reflecting." We stood in silence for a moment, the sound of distant music from the resort mingling with the rhythm of the waves. "I want to thank you," Richard said. "Finally." "For?" "Not firing me when you had every reason to." He turned slightly to face me, foreseeing the possibility of something different, even when I couldn't see it myself. I studied him in the moonlight, noting how differently he carried himself now. Less armored, more authentic. "It wasn't charity, Richard. It was strategic. You have valuable skills and experience. The company benefits from them when they're applied appropriately." He smiled slightly. Always the pragmatist. But we both know you could have found those skills elsewhere, without the baggage I brought. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But transformation isn't just about replacing parts. It's about reimagining how they work together. Richard nodded slowly. I've learned more in this past year than in the previous 20, about leadership, about value, about myself. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I was wrong about you. About many things. Coming from a man who had built his identity on never admitting mistakes, this simple acknowledgement represented a profound shift. We were all part of a system, I replied. You played the role that was rewarded. I chose a different path, and changed everything in the process. He gestured back toward the resort, where the celebration continued. What you've built here, it's remarkable. Not just the business results, but the culture. People genuinely want to come to work now. I smiled at the wonder in his voice, as though the concept of enjoying one's workplace was a revelation. For the Richard I'd first met, perhaps it was. That was always the goal, I told him. A company worth believing in, worth investing in, not just financially but personally. As we walked back toward the lights of the resort, I reflected on the journey we'd all taken, from a toxic culture built on fear and favoritism to a thriving organization founded on collaboration and genuine respect. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete. No human system ever is. But we had fundamentally changed what was possible at Vantage, proving that value comes in forms far more meaningful than organizational charts or corner offices. The woman once deemed worthless had revealed not just her ownership but her vision, and in the process, redefined what truly matters in the workplace we all share. 2 years to the day after Richard had called me worthless in that fateful meeting, I stood on the stage of the Industry Excellence Awards, accepting Vantage's recognition as most innovative workplace culture. The audience of peers and competitors applauded politely, unaware of the journey that had brought us to this moment. Transformation isn't about revenge, I said into the microphone, the spotlight warm on my face. It's about revelation, showing what's possible when we value people for their contributions rather than their conformity. As I scanned the audience, I spotted familiar faces from Vantage scattered throughout the crowd. Dev and his team at one table, Amara and Creative at another. And there, near the back, Richard, now heading our mentorship initiative, a program helping other companies build collaborative cultures. Sometimes, I continued, the most powerful thing we can do is stand firmly in our worth, even when others can't see it. And sometimes, the greatest leadership comes from having experienced what it means to be overlooked. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me at the reception, clutching a portfolio and gathering courage with each step. Ms. Taylor, she began hesitantly, your story has inspired me so much. I'm in a situation now where my ideas keep getting dismissed, and I'm wondering if you have any advice. I smiled, recognizing my former self in her uncertain posture and earnest expression. What's your name? Maya, she replied. Maya, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. Document everything, build skills relentlessly, and know when it's time to either transform a broken system or create something better yourself. Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I opened an email that had arrived during the ceremony. It was a formal offer to acquire Vantage, not from a competitor, but from a collective formed by our own employees. They wanted to take the model we'd built together and expand it further, with my guidance but their ownership. I smiled as I read their detailed proposal. This was always the ultimate goal, not just to transform a company, but to transform how people saw themselves within it, from passive employees to active stakeholders, from executing others' visions to creating their own. The journey that began with a single cutting remark in a conference room had come full circle. The woman once deemed worthless had not only proven her value but had empowered others to recognize theirs. I typed a simple response. Let's discuss how to make this happen. Sometimes our greatest achievements grow from our deepest wounds. Sometimes, being underestimated is the perfect foundation for extraordinary change. And sometimes, the most powerful response to disrespect isn't confrontation, but creation. Building something so undeniably valuable that it transforms not just a moment or a company, but the very definition of worth itself.